In this short video, I'm going to show you a very easy way to significantly improve the performance of the fountain pen Revolution Ultraflex Nib. If you're not familiar with this nib, I strongly recommend you give it a try. It offers some of the most impressive line variation in a flexible nib, modern or vintage, at any price, and it only costs $20. But there's an annoying catch with the wonderful Ultraflex nib. It's incredibly ink hungry. The fact is, it only works in a very few number of pens, and even then, not all that well. The pens from Fountain Pen Revolution that are designed specifically to work with this nib do okay, but even this Himalaya V2, a pen redesigned with a longer, more generous feed to solve the railroading problem, still suffers from railroading. In fact, it's not even starting. Let's give it a shot. So as long as you're going slow and flexing mildly, it keeps up, but then, up. If you speed up or press down too much, it starts to railroad, and then it takes its time restarting again. The only pen that does a fair job of keeping up, I think, is probably the Noodler's Ahab, but even it will railroad when really pushed. So as long as you're slow, it keeps up, even when you're really flexing. But if you want to speed up, it starts to railroad. Now fortunately, it does a pretty good job catching up fairly quickly, but as you can see, with long flex strokes, it really struggles. I think many people find this really frustrating, kind of like driving a sports car in really heavy traffic. You know, this pen is capable, this nib, is capable of outflexing everything on the market, but it just refuses to do it well. So without further ado, allow me to reveal the trick to making the Ultraflex work much better. Here it is. This little piece of metal will transform your sputtering, stuttering, railroading Ultraflex into a flex monster. What this is an ultrafeed, made to go on top of your nib, vastly improving ink flow. It's super easy to make and install, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. First, let me prove to you that the overfeed actually improves the flow. This is the world-famous Noodler's Ahab, a pen with a very generous ebonite feed designed for flex. The original nib is not nearly as flexible as the FPR nib, however, and though the pen does a better job than most in keeping up, at some point it starts to struggle. You can improve the flow by making sure the nib is exactly on the right spot on the feed, and also by heat setting the feed, the tutorials on which are all over YouTube. But even then, there will be limits to how well it performs. Now here's the Ahab with the overfeed. As you can see, it's much better. I'm really pressing down here and really going fast, probably much faster than anyone will usually go when writing or drawing, but it's good to know that the pen can perform well under such strenuous conditions. Of course, it's not perfect, but I think about as close to perfect as you're going to get out of the super flexy, super ink-hungry nib. Okay, so here's how this works. You're going to need a can of soda or beer. You're going to need some scissors, two kinds of sandpaper, 400 grit and 1000 grit, a marker, and a ruler. Take your can of soda and cut out a strip that's about, let's say, 1 centimeter wide and about 5 centimeters across. Okay, then you're going to take this little strip and sand off the coating on both sides. Okay, let's get the other side. And then, just to make the overfeed look a little bit better, a little more professional, you can take 1000 grit sandpaper and polish it a little bit. Okay, so the size you're looking for is approximately 3 centimeters long and about 6 millimeters wide. Now, the exact size and shape is probably not particularly important, but you don't want it so long that it's actually longer than the nib, and you don't want it wider than the nib as well. That's going to keep it from inserting properly. Okay, so this is the starting point. That's our blank. So once again, it should be about 3 millimeters wide and about 6 millimeters across. Then, at the halfway point, I'm going to start tapering the overfeed. Let me just straighten this out a little bit. There we go. Okay, so let's taper it. Going this way and going this way. Now, one thing I found is that the wider the tip of the overfeed, the more ink flow the overfeed provides. I believe the sweet spot is at about 2 millimeters. Anything wider is going to provide ink flow that's a little bit too generous, and then anything narrower is going to interfere with the tines opening. Right, that little point is actually going to go sticking into the tines. All right, then at the back of the overfeed, I'm going to cut off these little corners, like this way, and going this way. Again, that's going to help with insertion. And then one thing I found is that by sanding this little part and sharpening it a little bit, that also helps to insert the overfeed along with the nib. Okay, the last step is to take a thin brush like this. You can also use the end of chopsticks maybe, and curve this half of the overfeed. So this part of it is curved, like so. And then the other half, I'm going to take my fingernail and curve it down this way. So it almost looks like a nib. By the way, don't worry too much if the curvature is not correct. It's going to conform with the curvature of the nib once it's sitting on top. Okay, so this is the design I've arrived at. Again, you want something that's about 3 centimeters wide and about 6 millimeters across. So this is what the overfeed needs to look like. And here is how to insert your overfeed into your AHAB. I found that the easiest way to do this is to pull your nib and feed out about 3/4 of the way, ensuring that the alignment between your nib and feed remains unchanged. Then put the overfeed on top so that the tip of the overfeed sits about 2 millimeters below the tip of the nib. Then press the overfeed, nib, and feed together and slide everything back in. This will ensure proper alignment between everything. Once everything is in place, you can nudge the overfeed so that it's perfectly centered over the tines. This maneuver took a little bit of practice, so be patient, and with a few tries, you should be able to do it. You can also use the overfeed in the pens made by Fountain Pen Revolution, since they are quite similar to the AHAB, using a friction fit ebonite feed. These pens, even though they're designed for flex, really do have a hard time keeping up. This is a Himalaya V2, as I previously mentioned, and this is actually the second one I bought. The first one was unusable, railroading and skipping so much that I sent it back. This second one works slightly better, but still, not particularly well. As you can see here, the overfeed really helps, turning a pen that I had completely given up on into a reliable flex writer. This is great news because the pens from FPR are actually quite sturdy, affordable, and often made of very pretty materials. As I'm sure most of you know, you can use the FPR Ultraflex nibs in the Genub X450 and X750. These pens, despite having plastic feeds, actually provide very decent flow, but with the addition of an overfeed, you can really push this nib to its limits. It's actually easier to install the overfeed in the pens because you don't have the additional complication of making sure that the nib and feed are aligned as you would with the AHAB. However, it's a much tighter fit, so once the nib, feed, and overfeed are installed, you'll need pliers and a bit of force to remove everything. This is a fantastic option, however, being the cheapest flex nib out there. The nib and pen costing about $25, and now with the overfeed performing super duper well. By the way, if I want to install an overfeed into a pen with a housing unit where the fit is too tight to accommodate the overfeed, you can also attach it to the nib with 1 or 2 silicone rings. Here's a Franklin Kristoff pen that I've done this with. I simply shortened the overfeed to get the alignment right and used 2 silicone rings, one here and here, to firmly attach the overfeed to the nib. A slightly ugly arrangement, I know, particularly on a pretty pen like this, but we're only thinking about performance, and with this overfeed, it's much improved. But wait, there's more. I'm sure many of you are aware that the Zebra Genub, which is a nib designed for dip pens, with a little bit of tinkering, can work in a Noodler's AHAB. There are tons of detailed tutorials on how this is done, so I'm not going to show you how to do it. What I do want to show you is that with the same overfeed arrangement, the performance of this nib is greatly improved. Here is the nib without the overfeed. It works well in an AHAB, but as you can see, once I push this nib to its flex limits, there's just no way for the feed to keep up. And here is the pen with the overfeed. This Zebra G Franken pen setup is not the easiest to get working, requiring a lot of fine tinkering and adjusting, heat setting the feed, etc. Once you find the sweet spot, it works great, however, and with the overfeed, I think you really get the most out of this remarkable flexibility and responsiveness of this nib. As an added bonus, I have this beauty to show you. This is the very flexible, super ink-hungry Browse Rose nib that you can also install in an AHAB. This nib is about as flexible as you can get and really feels more like a brush than a nib. As you can see, it railroads pretty quickly by itself, but with an overfeed, it works fantastically well, putting down super wide, super juicy lines without a problem, only railroading when I really speed up and put my weight into it. I hope all of you found this video useful. For me, this is a real game changer. I've had a love-hate relationship with the FPR Ultraflex Nib for quite some time, admiring it for its tremendous flex and springiness, but being frustrated with its constant railroading. Now with the simple method of turbocharging the ink flow, I think I'll be using it much more, and I'm looking forward to really taking it through its drawing paces. I'm not sure you really need that amount of ridiculous flex for drawing, but it's good to know it's there if you need it, and quite fun to play with. Thanks for watching, hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and as always, if you have comments or questions, leave them below and I'll be happy to respond.